What is going on, BiggerPockets? It's Matt Fairclough. Hope you guys are well. Today we're going to talk about the reasons why why I wouldn't buy a rental property. So I was talking to one of my colleagues this morning, and he was like, what are some reasons why you would exit from a deal? Like, no matter what, you're going to cancel the contract if something like this comes up. So we had a really good conversation around it. And it's funny because a lot of people have their no-goes on like, oh, I never buy a building that has lead-based paint, or I never buy a building that has whatever it is. We're going to talk about all that stuff, but I've got my 3 reasons why I never buy a rental property. They're probably not what you're going to think. So let's go into it. So some reasons, like, people might like, let's shout them out from your desk while you're watching this, right? Well, let's say the property condition. Let's say it's in really bad disrepair. Okay, that's an interesting conversation, but I'm going to go and adjust my price to reflect for that. So condition. Now, in the world that a lot of us are in these days with regards to larger multifamily, we're looking at larger projects and stuff, they're all in rough condition. There's nobody that's out there selling great condition buildings that don't need any work, that have all their tenants are paying their rent and everything's in great shape and they're gonna sell it at a good price. That's not gonna happen. Unfortunately, if you want a good price on something, you're gonna have to be subjected to a property that's under rougher condition, that has maybe, tenants are a little rough around the edges, or tenants maybe need to be removed and new tenants put in, whatever it is, it's gonna have some hair on it. And so you're gonna need to trade based on price to reflect that condition. Here's another thing that people shout out to say, like, well, what about, I said lead-based paint. Interesting conversation. Let's talk in general about hazards, or perceived hazards, one of which is lead-based paint. Okay? Lead-based paint is an interesting conversation. There are investors that will not buy with lead-based paint. I have a lot of properties that have lead-based paint. Here's why. In my insurance policy, I have coverage against lawsuits for lead-based paint. So if a tenant goes and eats lead-based paint, unfortunately, God forbid, not that I want my tenants to do it, and we do our best to encapsulate it in our units. Just so you know, we're not slumlords. We do our best to encapsulate the lead-based paint, and tenants sign, and we make sure they read documents that warns them about the hazards of lead-based paint, so we educate our tenants on lead-based paint. But a lot of our stuff, we have stuff in Trenton here that was built 100 years ago. So you're not going to remediate that stuff. The cost of remediation is not economically feasible to do that. You're better off just encapsulating it in the walls and educating the tenants about protecting their families around lead-based paint, right? So we buy a ton of stuff that has lead-based paint just because of the market that we're in. So I grew up around properties that have lead-based paint in my real estate years, so I'm not afraid of it. And insurance policies, typically, if you make sure an insurance company has a rider in there for it, they will cover you against lawsuits from tenants that consume lead-based paint and come back to you on a liability claim, right? Now, insurance company's not going to pay for you to remediate the lead-based paint. That's going to be on you. So what you got to do is make sure that it's encapsulated in the walls, that it's painted properly, then the tenants have warnings on it. So I'm not afraid of lead-based paint. That's a dollar consideration you have to make, but not a no-go, right? We're going to make this the no-go column over here, like the no smoking sign, right? Those are the no-goes. We haven't gotten to them yet. You guys got to stay tuned for those. Another thing that people come up with, this gets involved in bigger real estate, is aluminum wiring. Now, we're buying a deal right now. We're buying a 200-unit apartment building, and it has some aluminum wiring in it, and it was under contract from another buyer who had it under agreement, and they found out that it had aluminum wiring, and they freaked out and said, no, we don't want to buy this place because it has aluminum wiring, so we're not going to do it. I already talked to my insurance guy. You can get insured for it. There are certain remediations that you do to remediate that hazard for aluminum wiring. There's certain outlets and switches you can put in that way knock down any risk that aluminum wiring may have, right? There's other hazards that people are concerned with that go back to dollars. There's other things. Now, this is one that just, it's just interesting, but there's some people won't buy because of tenants. Okay. So I'll buy property all day long because and I'll consider the people that are there, I'll consider the rent that they're paying, but there's other factors that regulate whether or not I wouldn't buy. Now, if a tenant's paying way below market rent, that can get remediated. If the tenant is not taking very good care of the property, that can get remediated with the right price. We'll get over here on how this reflects with that, because there's certain tenants would not buy a building if they're there, but it really goes on to this side. So let's get into that conversation. But tenants by themselves are not why I would buy properties. People I've talked to, they'll say, well, I don't want to buy properties where there's Section 8 tenants. You gotta be careful about saying that kind of stuff. But Section 8 tenants or tenants that are on in some sort of subsidy or whatever it is, as long as there's not some sort of a zoning, now this is a no-go, right? A zoning restriction or a deed restriction that prohibits how you are allowed to use the property and says things like, this property is deed restricted. There's something that's on the deed for the property that says this has to be affordable housing, or this property has to be income restricted, or it has to be, it's something that ties your hands on how you're allowed to operate the property. That, to me, is a no-go. Because the only way to get out from under that is to go through court, or is to get politicians involved and have them pass ordinances to rezone property for you. No thank you, not gonna go jump into the political hoops so I can run the business. So zoning and deed stuff. Now deed restrictions trace to here. If you have tenants that are on affordable income vouchers and you're required to take those, that could trace back to a deed restriction on your building that says that you're an income restricted building. If it's just a tenant that has a voucher for Section 8, go ahead and take them. In some states, like in New Jersey, you have to take them. That's considered discrimination if you don't, if you discriminate against Section 8 and things like that. In New Jersey, I've gotten into debates with people and BP before on whether that applies everywhere. In New Jersey, that's considered discrimination by saying I don't take Section 8. So I can't say I don't buy buildings that are only for Section 8 tenants or only for income restricted, right? Okay, so zoning and deed stuff I will touch, but it's something that I won't touch, at all. That is a no-go, right? The next thing that's a no-go for us is something regarding layout or functionality, okay? You guys ever heard the term functionally obsolete? I'll explain what that means in a section. So functionally obsolete means that back in the day, a 10 by 10 living room was okay. But now you would have a major problem leasing units that have really small bedrooms or really small everything, or let's see, they're not as common, but rooming houses where there's a common kitchen and a common bathroom and a bunch of rooms where everybody shares all these types of things. They're not as common. They're somewhat deed restricted, but that layout is something that's somewhat functionally obsolete. There's a small percent of the population that want property like that. I would not buy a rooming house because there's only so much of the population that want properties of that way. That's typically functionally obsolete. The other thing that I rarely do is, from a layout perspective, properties that used to be single-family homes or used to be larger single use and were cut up into multifamily. So the duplex that used to be a single family home, the 4 to 5 to 6 unit that used to be a single family home. I try and stay away from those. I do own a few of those, because it was great price or whatever, but I try to avoid those on the larger scale, properties that used to be this and got chopped up into this, because in that chopping up, you tend to lose some of the functionality of it. Somewhere or another, a corridor ends up small, or a bedroom ends up looking weird or something like that. So I try and stay away from things, but bottom line, the layout and functionality of a property are things that are pretty much immovable. If you're already seeing where I'm going, these are immovable. These are things that dollars can change. Okay, dollars and effort can change these things. These are things that are immovable, and the last one that we're going to talk about is location. So we have yet to develop a. It's funny, I've said a million times, if I could just show up with a helicopter and pick up this property and move it to another location, I'd love to buy it, because it's a great property, great look, love the layout, but it's in a bad location, not a location I would want to work in for a number of factors, which we'll talk about, right? We've yet to invent the real estate helicopter to come and pick up real estate and move it to a new location. Once that comes out, I may be interested in certain pieces that are great properties just in the wrong spot, right? So location factors that I wouldn't do play like this. It could be in a location that has really, really high crime, or crime that's outside of my acceptable limits. My limits are not too high on crime. I don't just general crime stuff. I mean, just unfortunately in some of the C neighborhoods you tend to have it. but I tend to look, I use, by the way, Trulia has a crime map that I use. And if it's anything more, if there's yellow like around the property, that's almost a no. It's typically, I like to see it in the green. There can be yellow or orange areas in like a radius of the property, but if it's around the property or on the property, if it's like red, because it goes green, yellow, orange, red, if there's anywhere red anywhere near the property, I won't do it. So crime, I tend to look in areas where there's low to no crime, or just okay crime, but maybe in the peripheral, right? But areas that are like D, that are high crime, like drug activity, or unsafe, that I wouldn't feel safe sending my people, or that I wouldn't feel safe going to myself or something like that, I don't do business. That's just me. There's plenty of money to be made in D neighborhoods, but we don't work in those neighborhoods for a number of reasons, right? Other reasons, okay, now, income. Now, I work in other areas of all kinds of different income, but you got to look at your goals for the property. And if your purchase price, if you need to rent the property to make the return you want to make for $600 a month, okay? And the median income in the area is, let's say it's, I don't know, $15,000 a year. Okay? If you do the math, someone making that income is not going to be able to afford that rent. Okay? So what you want to do is to look at the median income and make sure that someone making that median income would probably pass as a tenant applying for your property. So just general. That's something that we do to make sure that the median income earner can afford our complex based on our rental standards. So those are two reasons. Now, you can't change income. These are all immovable things, like the location and what the median income is, because that's outside the property. I can't really change that. I'm not going to go tearing walls down and changing the layout of a property, probably not. And so that's something I can't change. And I'm definitely not going to go fight the legal battles to go changing zoning and deed restrictions on property, right? So these are, in general, my things I can change with money, and my absolute no-go reasons why I would not buy a piece of real estate if it came up. Like these would be showstoppers. Look no further. Not gonna vet it anymore. And they're not what some people think that they are. It's not. I mean, I definitely would do some other things that would fall on this side of it. Love to hear some more chatter from you guys if you want to throw out like, hey Matt, would you do a deal that has this? A deal that needs a new roof? Would you do a deal that we haven't even talked about. I'm not even going to talk about it now. Let's talk about it in the comments. But deals that have things like slight environmental hazards, like asbestos or oil tanks or things like that. Let's talk about that in the comment section, because that's an interesting conversation. Some parts of the country have environmental concerns when you buy property. So let's talk about that in the comments. So thank you for watching, guys. As always, I appreciate you. And be sure to leave a comment. Be sure to share this video and help promote BP. Have a great and profitable week, guys.